Okay, this is session 11 and it's our last lecture in this course, and we're discussing design process and principles of or universal principles of design, and we'll also take some time to review. Obviously, you've figured out by now that there's very much of a process involved in creating a successful design. And any successful design goes through at least 4 stages of development, from definition to ideation to fabrication and then into implementation. I've broken these ideas down a little further based on experience, and so we just wanted to run over them with you. To design anything successfully, the first thing we do need to do is define. We need to know what problem we're solving, what the purpose of the design is all about, what we're trying to achieve with the design. Without that definition, we have no basis for any design, any research, anything else. So we first begin with that definition. So we define the problem. And throughout this course, I've mentioned, especially in critique, not to redefine the problem. There are times when a problem needs to be redefined because the issue at hand is not the problem that needs to be solved. But one always has to resolve what that particular solution is going to be, what it needs to address, what it has to look like, before one can do anything else in the process. So sometimes the client will come to you with a particular need, something that they state, but then in greater discussion with them you will actually realize that there is a different issue involved that needs to be solved, and then everything else that the client's concerned about will follow along after that. So in either case, in either situation, definition is crucial to a successful outcome. After you define and know what you're going for, then you look at what's been done, anything that relates. And this also involves to research on anything that is similar, in order that you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. There is no problem with borrowing as long as you're not plagiarizing. Borrowing, using inspiration, looking at how problems have been solved in the past, and from those finding a different way of solving the problem or going further in solving the problem. That's where innovation and original thinking comes in, because very seldom do we come up with something brand new and original just totally on a whim. Everything is based on what we already know or what already exists. So research comes right after the definition. Know what problem you need to solve and look at how it's already been solved, or attempts at solving it, or similar situations. If you were to design a house based on the arts and crafts movement, first thing you would do would be to go and understand what arts and crafts was all about, the stylistic guidelines of the movement, how it came about, what its mandates or tenets were. You might want to look at the industrial age. You might want to look at Art Nouveau and Secessionism, which were around that time, and then you might want to look at subsequent movements, just to better define what arts and crafts was all about. Once you have your problem in your research, then you set about with a strategy, and basically a strategy is a plan of action. It includes what you're going to do when, by when, how many review stages there are going to be. It's going to involve budgeting, scheduling, timing. It will even involve when you bring in inspectors, when you bring in particular contractors, and so forth. For instance, you can't really bring in the guys to put up the drywall until you've got the wiring and the plumbing all accomplished. So the strategy is the phases, the order of the design, the development, the gathering of materials, the organizing of your resources, the actual implementation, the fabrication of the design, and so forth, and then evaluation. Development is putting that design into a cohesive idea. Development is in the early stages of your strategy. You are coming up with ideas, you are doing a lot of drawing, you're looking at your research and drawing conclusions from it, and basically coming up with concepts and coming up with the right solution and what that's going to look like. Production is putting that solution into reality. It is actually the construction or the fabrication stage. The implementation comes after that. It is where you go through and kind of test and check everything, and then implementation leads to, is it successful? And evaluation follows up not just right after the job is completed, but it follows up 3-6 months down the road, checking back with the client, going back and revisiting the issues. What are people having any problems with the final design? Is it accomplishing the purposes that it was meant to accomplish, and things like that. Evaluation also is something that is part of the definition process. Can the problem be solved? It's part of your research. Is the research appropriate to the problem? It's part of the strategy. Is the strategy going to lead you through to the final solution? Is the strategy doable? Is there enough money in the budget? And if not, what do you need to leave out? Are your ideas solving the problem? Is everything in the production and implementation stages going to be solving the problem? So evaluation really carries on all the way through this process, because you are constantly assessing ideas and assessing input, assessing criteria, things like that, and judging yes or no, and making decisions yes or no. Does it solve the problem? Is it going to meet the need? And so forth. Within your development process, you will be developing visuals to sell the idea, to sell the solution to the client, to communicate the solution to your contractors, and to get the approvals and so forth for whatever it is you're doing. So a lot of your process is going to be a lot of drawing, a lot of writing, a lot of planning, things that don't necessarily are not necessarily considered really creative, but necessary to the business aspect of what you're involved in. And so design is by nature, because it's business oriented, it's practical oriented, there is going to be a lot of planning and things that are not considered directly creative in terms of your activity. Wanted to talk a little bit about the ideas of rules and randomness. And we think of creativity as being without limits, without borders. We can be creative if we have entirely free rein to do something. Creativity actually thrives best when there are boundaries, just like liberty is best understood in the aspect of law, or within the constraints of law. Because certain things are not, although all things might be possible, not all things are beneficial. And the rules are what makes something beneficial. It keeps the creativity focused in the right direction. And so rules are necessary. And just in discussing the whole process, you can be as creative as you want, but if you're not solving the problem, your solution is going to fail. In fact, it's not going to solve anything. Rules are known as things that basically give you the parameters, the criteria, the specifications. And given certain rules, criteria, and specifications, if you don't meet those or you try to circumvent them, the design can fall apart. The design can not rise to meet the expectations that are required. For instance, I have a friend who purchased a house out here in Ventura County a while back, and they got it very inexpensively because the original contractor who built the house did not include rebar in the concrete foundation of the house. So the house, the foundation was actually cracked and in two, and the house was entirely compromised because its foundation was cracked. So in circumventing the rules to save money, it jeopardized the future of that structure. And so my friend actually, they bought the house and they totally gutted everything. They had the outside foundation wall, but the concrete flat, the pad, had to be totally dug out and rebar added, and then the concrete poured again for a solid foundation. And so the rebar within the concrete is a rule that one follows, and one should not get around that. You can be as creative as you want with what your foundation looks like. If you're pouring a driveway, you can be as creative as you want there, but you gotta, put the rebar in so that the driveway will perform over time. So rules include things like grid systems and floor plans. You can't design for a 10 by 12 foot room if your floor plan is a 10 by 14 foot plan. So you have to stay within the boundaries of the design space. We've talked about that basically throughout the course. Patterns, which we've just finished up with, also follow rules. Basically, in setting up a pattern, there is an expectation, an order, a systematic understanding of what the pattern's going to do, and that's basically a set of rules. Rules that environmental designers, interior designers get to deal with include building codes. There's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do. Certain things need to be constructed to code so that they're safe, and they will ensure the longevity of the structure and the lives of the people using the structure. Another type of rule is the idea of stylistic interpretation, period styles, such as doing an arts and crafts renovation, or doing a Memphis-oriented design or something like that. So there are things that need to be adhered to that express particular styles and trends throughout the ages, and breaking out of those rules, breaking out of those constraints basically doesn't help solve the problem. Any kind of system involves rules. A system is a methodology, and we talked about up here, we've got the grid systems and the floor plans, and there's a general way that when you create a floor plan and you create your drawings for the contractors to follow and things like that, there's certain rules and systems that you need to follow in order to communicate correctly to any contractor who's going to be reading them. And process is a rule. Process has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You can't start in the middle and go back to the beginning and then go to the end. There is a natural and logical sequence in developing any design solution, and that process, as we've just discussed, follows one after the other. And you have to have the one before you can have the next one, and you have to have the next one before you have the subsequent one, and so forth. And you have to have everything in place in order to get to the end result. So we deal with rules all the time. And we say we don't like them, but we can't live without them, and we actually prefer the constraints. There's a safety and security issue for us within the constraints of following systems, things that make sense, and so forth. So be incredibly creative, but stay within the guidelines. At the same point, there are things within the rules that we'll call randoms, variations on anything. You can take a system and set it up, and say in a design process, and any designer is going to tweak the process to their own devising, or to fit their own working style or whatever. They're still going to have that beginning followed by the middle followed by the end. That's the rule. But there can be variation in those things. Interpretation is also something that can be understood as being random. We can have the same set of rules and interpret it very differently. If you've been looking at the design solutions that other students have submitted and looking at the critiques as they've been posted, you will notice that no project that anybody has submitted looks like anybody else's. And even though any and all projects have the potential for being completely successful, for meeting the basic issues and even exceeding them, it's the individual interpretation of the specs that gives the range of difference, the range of creative solutions within the same design project. So just that understanding, you're all given the same specifications and you all come up with different ways of solving it. Manipulation also. Manipulation is basically reforming, taking what's already there and kind of tweaking it and reforming it into something else. So you can take a sheet of paper and manipulate it into a wad, kind of ball it up and squeeze it all together and get it fairly dense, and then you can toss it at somebody or toss it into the trash can. That's an idea of manipulation. You're still working with the paper, you've just kind of changed its physical state. So we manipulate many things to come up with a different result or a different solution. Intuition also plays a part. Design has to be used pretty much intuitively, especially spatial design. People need to know how to use things, how to use a space that you've designed. And so intuition and basic understanding come into play with, okay, this is how a drawer opens, this is how a door opens. I mean, it's real basic. But you can devise a space that uses that intuition but allows people freedom to maneuver in their own way within that space. Serial design follows rules but has different expressions of those same rules over different iterations. So serial design we find a lot in dealing with environment, interior, and architecture with restaurant chains and things like that, so that you have basically the same experience, the same kind of decor, the same flavor of things, even though you have different locations. And if you look at Starbucks, every Starbucks store is different, and if you've ever been to the original one on Pike in Seattle, it is, I think, the most different of any of the Starbucks that I've seen. But each store is different, but at the same time, they're all the same. They all have the same design ideas. They all have the same criteria and things like that. They're just not necessarily reinterpreted, but they're varied. But you know it's a Starbucks as opposed to a Pete's when you walk in, and you also know Pete's because it looks like Pete's and not Starbucks. And then Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf looks like Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. So you cannot confuse the three coffee shops. When you walk in, you know where you are. And so serial design allows for variation, but keeps strong consistently from location to location. I want to talk a bit about the universal principles of design. These are not the universal design principles that include accessibility and so forth. Universal principles of design are those things that undergird the idea of aesthetics and function, and Gestalt principles are part of them. The Fibonacci sequence and ideal proportions are part of the universal principles of design, and there's a bunch of them. We're only going to go over a few that directly pertain to space design, interior design, environmental design. But there are many that deal with design in the two-dimensional realm as well as the three-dimensional realm. And there's something to be aware of, because if you understand these, then you will design appropriately to meet people's needs and to address how people encounter design and so forth. One of the basic issues that underlies the principle of aesthetic usability is the idea that the more aesthetically sound a design is, the more comfortable it is to use. And so you design according to balance and color and implied line and rules of navigation on an implied line through a space and so forth, structure and composition and so forth. And people do better in those types of spaces than if things are just thrown together. Consider, for example, a really well-designed kids' room versus a room that is basically a catch-all or a junk room, or a drawer in the kitchen that has been intelligently subdivided into various parts for to allow for the storage of cooking utensils or things like that, as opposed to just a junk drawer. And how usable is one over the other, how easy it is to find something in the one drawer that is thoughtfully put together, and how much longer it takes to find something in a junk drawer. So aesthetic principles applied appropriately allow for the design to be used to its greatest effect. Entry point is something that is very much a consideration when you're designing space. Any space you design has an entry point, a place where, two-dimensionally, where the eye enters the space, three-dimensionally where the physical person actually enters the particular space. So obviously in a residence, that would be the primary entry point would be the front walkway coming up from the sidewalk and the front door. And the entry point leads to or gives rise to the expectation of what's behind the door. And then once you get inside, there should be a well-ordered and comfortable navigation going on. So entry point deals with an initial impression, but then once you're inside, there should be an understanding, a prospect, a view of where to go. What do you do? Where do you go? And what's it like inside the space? And then once you're in the space, do you know what to do next? And so there should be what we call progressive lures, things that will lead people into various parts of the space, or lead people through the space to the next entry point of the next space and things like that. So entry points are very important as a principle of design. If we don't like the point of entry, we're not going to go further. We're basically going to try to leave and walk away. curb appeal is probably a fairly well-known and basic idea of entry point when it comes to residences. For commercial spaces, restaurants, stores, entry points include the display window and how all of those, how the front facade leads people into the interior of the space and matches their expectation of what to expect once they get inside. The idea of forgiveness is an interesting concept. Basically, forgiveness in a structural understanding is the idea that there are certain things added to that help navigate. So in terms of a walkway, we add lighting at night so there's less opportunity for injury. Road signs are an aspect of forgiveness. They make the roads safer to travel. So we have stop signs at intersections or, unexpected, water crossings like this. We have speed limit signs, we have yield signs, we have things that warn people to do something that make their travel on those roads safer. And the same thing is true with interior spaces or residential spaces such as this. If a person needs to negotiate a walkway at night, it's a really good idea to light it so that people have a better way of traveling. Hierarchy of needs. The basic idea of hierarchy of needs is that our basic needs need to be satisfied before higher level needs can be dealt with. So successful design meets people's needs at the most basic foundational level. And then whatever is above and beyond that is icing on the cake. We've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which start with physiological needs, needs of safety, needs of love, needs of self-esteem, and needs of meaning or self-actualization. In design, the hierarchy of needs can start with basic functionality. Does the faucet turn on, and if you put it over to the left, is it warm, and if you put it over to the right, is it cool? That type of thing. Reliability is also a basic need after function. We expect things to perform the way they're meant to. And when they stop performing, we either toss the design out or we go get it fixed or we replace it. Usability is this something that is something we want to use? Is it friendly? Is it easy? Some things that are functional and reliable are not necessarily easy to use. And so the whole idea behind usability is that it's like it's like a middle level understanding. We can get along with functionality and reliability, but we like things to be easy to use. Proficiency, developing the ability to master something. Proficiency is the idea that people are actually empowered to do things better than they could without the design. A vacuum cleaner allows people to be more proficient at keeping their house clean, supposedly. And then after proficiency, creativity. If all the other needs have been satisfied, people can start interacting with the design in innovative ways. And so the design in itself becomes something that functions to bring on maybe new designs or new ways of living, new ways of thinking, and so forth. So again, hierarchy of need in terms of design is the idea that in order for a design to be successful, it must meet people's needs at a basic level before it can even attempt to satisfy higher level needs. Factor of safety is basically adding things into a design that ensure and go beyond basic safety issues. The addition of more elements than we really think is necessary will ensure people's safety, because we have a lot of unknowns in how something's going to be used. I watch Holmes on Holmes, Mike Holmes is Canadian, of course, and he does everything to Canadian building codes. And he's always ranting about it's not up to code, let's do it right the first time, and that sort of thing. So he's kind of known for his, friendly rants about ineptness in construction and so forth. But one of the things that is clear that, especially living in Southern California, there's things that happen in Canada weather-wise that one has to allow for in construction, which doesn't happen in Southern California. And one of the things that happens in California that is not part of the code system in Canada is the strapping or the bolting of the house to its foundation, and because of earthquake. So we go beyond, we bolt things together, we run stringers, we allow for flexibility. A lot of taller buildings are built on pads that shift and move with the movement of the earth and things like that, without causing the building to be destroyed in an earthquake and so forth. So there's all of these additional factors that go into the building codes in California because of earthquake issues that don't happen in Canada. In the Delta area in Louisiana, houses are built 10 feet off the ground. They're up on basically tall platforms because of hurricanes and because of flooding. And we don't have that in California. So there are factors of safety that we add to things which maybe universally are not necessary, but they kind of go above and beyond to attempt to ensure safety and to allow for unknowns and variables in things. Consistency is another issue that is a universal principle. And this relates to the idea of serial design that we talked about just a little bit ago. Consistency allows for a common experience over a variety of different locations and spaces, and we see this a lot in restaurant design and in gas station, filling station design, things like that, store designs. If you walk into a Nordstrom, you'll never mistake it for a Walmart. Because of consistency, and Nordstrom looks different than Neiman Marcus and so forth. So, and Walmart definitely looks different than Kmart. So you have consistency in design to give users a common and expected experience. I can go to a Target store in North Carolina and it's pretty much the same as the Target store in my neighborhood. So the idea of the consistency is there to give the people a common experience, maintaining brand, maintaining integrity in commercial spaces.